happening, guys? We are talking live now on, I think it's, Monday night? It's getting close. We're a couple days away. Pretty pumped about where we're going with this draft. Pretty pumped about the content that we have given you guys leading up to this draft to talk about so many different things and different angles at which the Browns will go about these players. I have had on an innumerable number of people who have given you players they like, whether early players, late players, whatever. I think that there have been some great opinions, kind of guys that maybe are in the threshold, guys that aren't in the threshold. But when we talk about the threshold, that's what I really want to dig into, because I think there's an understanding of what Andrew Berry wants to do with this draft. But I think people throw it around, but they don't necessarily understand the things that this front office leans toward doing on a consistent basis. And that dates back to Andrew Berry's time with Sashi Brown's front office. Whether you like him or not, they're still a part of the Browns draft history, and especially Berry's, and then Andrew Berry's time in Philadelphia and his first draft of evidence. So what I wanted to do is bring on a guest who I think is really good at laying out the guardrails for you. I'm not just talking age. I'm talking about athletic ability, production, and some of the things that these guys have done in college, because there are definitely some patterns here. And if the Browns don't pick the guy that you like, is there a reason that is beyond just you maybe having an untrained eye about whether a player is good or bad? They have criteria by which they follow. We are going to bring on TA here in just a second. Before we do so, a couple house cleaning reminders. We are having a 2021 OBR draft show. It's at 7:30 both nights, Thursday night and Friday night. We're running the whole thing for the first round. So we hope you guys will stick with us the whole night of the first round. And then we'll do a couple hours kind of at picks 55-ish, a little bit ahead of the Browns. Unless they make a trade up, we'll go live early, all the way through their pick 91 on day 2. And then maybe we'll check in on day 3. We'll see. But we're officially doing Thursday, Friday. We hope you guys can join us. We think it'll be a fun time. All the OBR staff. We'll bring in some outside guests as well. We'll talk about everything, break it down from every angle, and give you a different option to the normal NFL Network ESPN talk, and focus on it from a Browns perspective. So we hope you join us. But back to today's topic, which is the guardrails, the data, the analytics behind the tendencies of this front office. I'm going to bring on TA. He does great work, guys. He's a contributor at Sharp Football, which, if you know anything, they're on the cutting edge of giving you data analysis. He does the Sharp Angles podcast. He does betting, gambling information that is way over my head that I just try to figure out what he means by it. TA, what's happening, man?
Hi, what's up, Jake? How are you?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this topic, and we'll see some user questions come in during this. So if one does come up, I'll throw it up on the screen for you. We're going to share some things you have put out on Twitter recently, and I'll do my best to jump through them and navigate them as best I can to get up the data clearly. I want you to talk to the listeners about, if you can, some of the history work you've done on the guardrails for athleticism, spark scores, those things that you think Andrew Berry is most interested in when they look at the prospects they'll take it, maybe 26, 59 and beyond.
So I think it's it's a complicated process. I don't think anyone, we're not in the draft room, and we're not going through the evaluation process, so nobody knows for sure. And it's pretty they've got some complex systems in place, and obviously Paul DePodesta does a great job, and he's brought that in with him a handful of years ago. But I think from a fan's point of view, at least we have some evidence of some of the types of things that they look for. And so I think if you step back, and people always ask, well, how do they come up with these draft lists? How do they come up with 114 draftable players? And I try to equate it to, I'm my full-time job, my real job. I'm in finance, I'm in investing, and anyone who does any sort of investing, and there's a universe of a couple thousand companies and stocks that are out there, right? So if you're a money manager, how do you figure out how to create a diverse portfolio of stocks? Well, you've got to narrow down that universe to a workable list, and you apply these filters or these guardrails, and could be anything from just market cap size to I don't like companies with a lot of debt. So, I'm going to only look for companies with debt to equity ratio below a certain percentage. I need companies that are, have positive revenue growth for multiple years, all those sorts of things to get to a working list, maybe 100 stocks, whatever the number is. And then you dive in deep and you do the fundamental research, and you look at the management teams and all those sorts of things to come up with kind of your portfolio. So I think, these guys take a similar approach. So they, if you consider this kind of like a pyramid at the top, it's, we really, in the first 2 rounds of the draft versus rounds 3 and 7, I think they look at different things. But, first 2 rounds, we look for elite athleticism, and that's measured by, SPARC scores or relative athletic scores and whatever. We only have the public information. I'm sure they have more sophisticated systems, but those are the types of pieces of data that we can look at as a fan. Look at those athletic traits, but then also guys have to produce. They're not drafting guys who are athletic marvels in rounds 1 and 2, but haven't produced on the field. If you look back since 2016, and we only have a couple of years of data, but all those guys, even Corey Coleman, as bad as he was a great college player and he had great athleticism. Emmanuel Agba, Myles Garrett, Peppers, and Njoku, all the way down the line. All these guys were workout warriors, and they were able to produce on the field. So the combination of those two things, I think, are really at the top, at the forefront when they look at rounds 1 and 2. And I think they attack very specific positions. I mean, at this point, I think we've all figured out, the passing game is really the key here for any sort of analytical focused front office. It's, the quarterback. It's protecting the quarterback at the tackle point of view. It's catching the ball and big plays from the wide receivers and tight ends. On defense, it's rushing the passer. So you're not looking for just run stuffers in rounds 1 and 2. That's not the goal here. It's attacking the quarterback. It's coverage in the secondary. All those sorts of things filters down on top of all of these characteristics and these metrics, and you add you essentially overlay a lack of red flags. So they haven't really drafted anybody in rounds 1 and 2 in the last handful of years that have any sort of medical issues. Grant Delpit had a little bit last year, but they were kind of nagging injuries. There weren't any major red flags, and they really haven't drafted anybody with character issues for the most part. So you apply all those metrics and you get a list of 114 names, right? And it's a matter of, how do we go about, dispersing that list? And so I think with rounds 1 and 2, especially, it's really the elite athleticism. And by that, I mean, since 2016, every first round pick that Andrew Berry and Paul DePodesta have made have at a minimum a SPARC percentile of 89% or higher. So they're in the elite of their of their size and position group. And then you look at relative athletic scores, because this year, obviously, there's a lot of missing information with the pro days and whatnot. So they don't all have SPARC scores, but because you essentially need full data on all these different skill, these different workouts to get that SPARC data. So the ones that don't have SPARC data, they do have some relative athletic scores that kind of uses a combination of a handful of different drills and whatnot to come up with a score. So all of those guys have at least, we call it 8.8 or higher relative athletic score. And essentially 9 is, elite, 8 is really good, but 9 is kind of the cutoff for elite. So all of their first round picks have at least an 8.8 or higher and a SPARC score of 89% or higher. And if you even look at, Andrew Berry in his 1 year in Philly, they drafted Andre Dillard, a left tackle out of Washington State, who was, his athleticism was off the charts. He had a 97 percentile SPARC score and a relative athletic score of 9.7. So, he was, again, at the top of the list. So, we've seen throughout the years just all of these first and second round picks, even going back to Emmanuel Agba, he was in the 82nd percentile, really athletic, all produced. Agba was, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. We obviously know about Corey Coleman was great at Baylor. All of these guys produced at high levels in college, along with the athleticism. So, I think they look at kind of the first and second round picks in that manner. And this year, you apply that, you might only get, a handful of names that really stand out. There's only, 20, 25 guys that really fit the bill because there's so much unknown and there's a lot of, medical issues and off the field issues. So that's what makes it difficult. But I think with as much information as we have, you can apply those, like I mentioned, those guardrails, and within each specific position, it can get very granular. Edge rushers might have very specific measurements or, arm length or 10-yard splits and whatnot to come up with, the types of players that they're looking for. But, this front office and all the research analysts have done, years and years of analysis on, what type of metrics essentially reduce the risk factor when it comes to each of these groups, right? Like they might look back and say, all right, every edge rusher who produced a 10-yard split above a 1.65, you essentially increase your bust factor by 50% or whatever. I'm making that up, but something like that. So they essentially, apply all of these metrics and these measurements to each of the position groups, and they come up with their list. So, I do the best that I can, just kind of back weighting and back testing, what they've done in the past and kind of how they present themselves. And, I think we come up with a workable list. And then rounds 3 and 7 is really just a combination of, elite athleticism, but maybe underperformed in college. Think, Donovan Peoples-Jones, or guys that are just really, really tested poorly, like a Rashard Higgins or a Harrison Bryant, who are kind of bottom, 10 percentile in the Spark ratings, when they tested, but, were great, producers, started a bunch of games and put up a bunch of stats. So it's kind of a combination of those two things, I think, when you look at rounds 3 to 7. So, I know it's long-winded, but that's essentially the types of metrics and the way I think they look at it. And that's kind of how we came up to these lists.
Yeah, and this is good stuff, as you guys are seeing on the screen, and this is all available on TA's Twitter account at ClevTA. He has these up, his big board, and then we're going to talk about some Pro Football guys, Pro Football Focus grades, who, when they look at their draft guide, kind of guys who are maybe undervalued, overvalued. It's interesting to me because market share is another big part of this too. How did a guy perform amongst his teammates? How much of the actual share of tackles for lost sacks did they produce? And then there's a lot of things you can pull from that. A guy who only had, maybe a 62% tackle percent share, something low. I don't know. I'm just throwing out a number. They don't technically hit at a Pro Bowl level this percentage of the time. So there's a whole bunch of market share stuff. And TA does a good job here putting PFF grade stuff up here too, because listen, the NFL uses it. Whether you like it or not, the NFL uses it. And it's a big portion of what the NFL does is charting snaps and charting alignments, but they also use – it's a quick way to cut out coaching staff evaluation of some things. And it's a quick way to pull up and give, while an imperfect number at times, it does give a relative idea of how a player is playing. Because if you go back and track overall team grades, you're going to see teams that are winning football games with higher grade outs, and that's natural. So, while a coach sitting in a coach's office might have a different grade for his player as he's looking at each individual play because he knows the teaching technique, he knows the scheme to perfection, there's still going to be a relative to this guy get the job done or not. You can get really fine detailed on that, but for the most part, PFF does a pretty good job. So names that stand out to me here, TA, we'll talk. Jalen Phillips, man, if the concussion thing wasn't real, it's probably a top 10 pick. I mean, he's right. He would be in the discussion. Am I right? I watched the tape. The guy can flat play. You got the numbers here to back it up. He seems like a guy who would be a top 10. If he slides to 26, he becomes interesting. The medical stuff is dicey though.
Yeah, so this is the problem. This is by far. I've done this since 2017. I actually helped a buddy on a radio show for the Browns a couple of years ago when it was the year 2 of Sashi Brown, kind of helping with this type of stuff. So I've been doing it every year as best as I can. This is by far the toughest. I think it's a combination of, first of all, we've never really. I mean, the Browns have always had a high pick, right? So they've kind of had their pick of the litter. The universe is a lot stronger in terms of types of players. So that's one thing. Just picking later, you get obviously less quality. But then 2, obviously all the opt-outs, all the missing pro day numbers, who even knows if the pro day numbers are real in a lot of these cases. So it makes it really hard. And there's so many, especially with the edge guys, like I included Phillips and I included Aguilari. I'm not even sure in a normal year I would. I think because of how the roster stands, and I think because it's kind of a fluky year, they may loosen up some of the guardrails a little bit to allow guys like this. I mean, Jalen Phillips had multiple concussions, was essentially told by UCLA's medical staff to retire, and he did, and then came back and had a monster year. So, I mean, if you eliminated that, you're right. But I think he would have been a top 10 pick probably if you eliminate that. So, if he does fall to the Browns, I think they're going to look at that and say, look, is it worth the risk at 26? And that's why I included him. Like I said, normally you wouldn't because of the concussions and, this front office probably being a little bit more risk averse than most front offices. But I think where the roster stands and just the lack of, available players really to fit in here, I did add him. I mean, look, Aguilari, he's got a nice 40. His sack numbers were tremendous. He's got great PFF grade, right? So on the field, he fits that bill. But his vertical leap, just out of nowhere, it was like 30 inches, was in the 14th percentile. If you look at PFF's historical ranks, it kind of, I don't know where that came from. I don't know if he slipped or whatnot, but I mean, it's just so off, putting compared to the rest of his numbers that really lowers some of his, spark numbers and his, athletic metrics. And so maybe they just say, look, that was kind of a bad day. He's a better athlete than what he showed, with that drill. So we're okay taking him there. I mean, I don't know if he fits with, kind of being a 3-4 outside linebacker style. But in terms of everything else on the field and, with the metrics, for the most part, he fits. But, I wanted to put guys in here that I think they would at least bend the guardrails a little bit. And so those are two guys at the, the edge position. I actually like the edge guys. I might be with you. I like the edge guys in the second round probably more than I do in the first round, to be honest here.
It's just so hard to find a really perfect prospect at 26, and that's why it's the guardrail stuff or the categories they try to put these things in. And what TA is trying to explain is they're looking for as many ways to mitigate the risk as possible. You're going to have risk at pick 26. It's an unavoidable situation, but you do as best you can to find the spots that are the least risky, and that's what they're trying to balance out. Another guy who, listen, we know you love J.C. Horn. I love J.C. Horn. It's no secret. The NFL now loves him too more than he was originally being talked about. He'll be a top 12 guy. Patrick Surtain will be gone. But Greg Newsome gets really interesting because he's another guy whose testing is off the charts, his relative athletic score, his tape. I call him a mini Denzel. He's got a lot of similar features in the way he plays, the way he can flip his hips. He's twitchy. He can run. He can play the ball at the point of attack. But he's played like 16, 17 games in the past 3 years. He's hurt a lot. So it's another example there. I mean, do you like Greg from the data perspective? Do you like him? It's just the same with Jalen Phillips, where it's like, we just don't know. You don't know, man.
Yeah, and again, I don't know how they treat, kind of the soft tissue nagging injuries versus, concussions. Multiple concussions is a big deal. I mean, he could literally be out of the league and, with one concussion in the NFL. So I think that's a much bigger risk from a medical concern. But again, I'm not examining. We don't have the physicals on a guy like Newsome or the medicals. So we don't know if that's just kind of a, hey, it's kind of a fluky thing, or if it's going to be a nagging thing for the rest of his career. They've got that data too. I haven't run that analysis ever in terms of how, do nagging injuries in college, the soft tissue ones, do they translate to the pros? They probably do. But again, we're stretching as much as we can at 26 because there's just a lot of warts on a lot of these guys. But I think I think the good news with taking a guy like Newsome, I would probably lean that way. But the good news with taking a guy like Newsome is you don't need him to step in to be your number one, right? Like some of the guys, I saw an article last week that pointed out, hey, maybe not, maybe taking a corner in round one's a bad idea because all these guys have flopped in their year one. They don't really contribute well. But if you look at all those guys like CJ Henderson and AJ Terrell and even Okudah, as great as they are in terms of prospects, they're stepping in to be the number one corner, the shutdown corner on these bad secondaries. It's tough proposition. I mean, Okudah had to face Devontae Adams right off the bat last year, for example. You bring in a guy like Newsome or another corner, he's your number two, maybe your number three right off the bat. So you get kind of an easier test and you're not forced to really toss him one-on-one against, these all pros. So I think that does help from a risk mitigation standpoint. You don't necessarily need a shutdown corner. You just need a good, solid corner. And if, Newsome's that guy at 26, I think that makes sense.
It'd be great, too, because you could match it up week to week. Say you're playing Pittsburgh and you got Troy Hill with some inside-out experience. Maybe he's a better matchup for Juju. You can play Deontay Johnson is a better match. It's a great point. It's a guy who, whether it's an edge, whether it's a wide receiver, whether it's a corner, or even a safety, like we're talking about here, all these different positions, they're not coming in and expected to be the guy right away. They got some time. They're going to be expected to get on the field and produce to an extent, but they're not expected to come in and be the guy, like Corey Coleman, who would have to carry the burden in certain situations. So you got some round two guys up here. There's guys I've talked about I love on here, Peyton Turner, among several others. I got a question that came up here I'll throw up to you. Do you think Caleb Farley is off the board if he falls? Listen, I'll answer it first. I'll throw it to UTA. Again, it's what do we know? What do we not know? I mean, the agent tries to say he's healthy, and I don't know. The agent was Drew Rosenhaus, maybe. I think it's like we don't know, man. I don't know. We don't know. The back injury, just like Jalen Phillips, is serious. 2 surgeries is real, and it's like, in my opinion, if he falls to 26, there's probably a reason he's fallen to 26. He's too talented on tape. So I don't know. Where are you at with it, man?
Yeah, I look at it the same way. It's one of those where, let's say the back issues aren't really a concern and he's cleared by most everybody, like they said he was. He mentioned last week, well, he's going to go well before 26 because he's so talented, right? He's not even sniffed the Browns. And if he does make it to the Browns, that means that a bunch of teams have him off their board, and probably because the Browns are more risk averse, like I mentioned, they're not going to take him anyway. So, I don't know if he's officially off the board, but I just think that it doesn't really match up with where the Browns are sitting, because I'm not even sure it's going to matter. Either he's just not going to make it there because he's clear by everybody, or he's going to make it there, but they're just going to pass because he's probably either off their board or just an extreme red flag. Like I mentioned, they have not drafted any play. If you look at all their first and second round picks since 2016, eliminate the Dorsey, Greedy Williams pick, because he really wasn't. I wouldn't call him an analytics guy, but they haven't drafted anybody who has any sort of really medical concern coming out, right? Like I can't recall any of these guys that had any sort of issue that you can sit there and say, all right, that's an iffy one. This would be a kind of a new proposition for them to take a swing at a guy like Farley. But again, you never know. This is an odd year, and these things could be loosened, and we don't have the medical reports. But I just find it hard to believe that he would be there at 26, and it would be a guy that they would think that highly of and is on the board.
I'm with it. This day 2 stuff we have up here. Any guys that stand out to you? Maybe Milton Williams, for example, a guy who's just high across the board after last year, every grade and testing all of it. Yeah,
it's funny. I think I don't know if it was Dane Brugler or somebody mentioned today, and I had mentioned it last week. I actually think if you give some truth serum to Andrew Berry, I think he would love to have multiple 3s and a couple 2s and have him sit at 26. And I think the second round is loaded. I think kind of the entire round, but I think you can find some really good players. I'd rather have a couple of these guys than have to force myself to take somebody at 26. But I think the edge guys. I love Peyton Turner. I know you do too. I don't watch as much film as you have on him, but he checks every box. He only did a couple of drills this pro day, but a really good vertical. His relative athletic score from what he did do is pretty high. High sack percentage, so he did produce on the field. Good PFF grade. I mean, a 90 from a pass rush perspective, got good, height, weight, like all of that kind of fits the bill. It's interesting. His, PFF seems to be a lot higher than kind of the consensus, and I'm not sure if, why or if that even matters, but he's a guy that I would love to get if you do take a Newsome or you do take a receiver round 1. He'd be a perfect guy, I think, at the end of round 2. I think Basham's kind of an underrated. I think he's more of a high floor guy. Probably doesn't have the upside, but he kind of barely checks all those boxes, right? In terms of production and athleticism. But he's a guy I would look at. And then I think Milton Williams is a good one. We talked about this on Twitter last week. When I was running these numbers, I had to double check that I was running the right numbers, because look at his explosion metrics. I mean, he's 99th percentile in PFF's historical database among all defensive tackles in the vertical, and 97th in the broad. His relative athletic score is almost a 10. He's got a 99% spark percentile. Like, he's literally Aaron Donald from a metric standpoint, probably better, if you can believe that. So I was curious kind of where he came from, like why this is a bad defensive tackle class. Is it because of the size that he's, being pushed down, or, what am I missing, I guess? And you did a good job explaining it on Twitter about the type of player he's been.
Yeah, he's a guy who came on late, and there's, like you said, this kind of sums up the class where you're talking about maybe getting some more 2s and 3s, because you just don't know. With him, this guy was sort of a late 1-year flash at the end of the year. It was like, okay, we see some things on tape we like. He started to play with a little better pad level. These testing numbers are ridiculous, but we would love to see this guy in college 1 more year, but you're not going to get that. You're just not going to get it, so you got to make a hunch play. And that's why with so many of these guys who are hunch plays, I think you made a great point. And the question here that somebody asked is, say the top 4 corners are gone by 26, which whatever, the top 3 or however they rank them, and maybe there's not a 4th that they like. Do you think it's reasonable to trade back for like a second, third, and a second next year and use extra picks to maybe trade for Gilmore? We had Lane Atkins on yesterday who says the Gilmore stuff is far from dead, that there is definitely some interest in Stephon Gilmore from Cleveland side, which is big news from people he trusts inside the building. And listen, if you even take Gilmore out of that, I've been a staunch believer that they should look at trading down. If there's not someone they're absolutely in love with from meeting all of the thresholds like you've mentioned in here, and that doesn't seem very likely, then they should definitely try to double up some 2s and 3s and try to carry something into 2022. I know you probably align with that. Is there anybody, and I'll ask you this, like, are you team trade down? And if you are team trade up, is it only one guy, JC Horn?
Yeah, you follow my account, huh? Yeah, I love JC
Yeah.
Horn. I think he's a perfect fit for exactly what they need. And I mean, again, checks box athleticism and production on the field, big school. I mean, it's a good question. Like, I think they would love to, if they can trade back from 26, let's say gain a late 2 this year and then gain a 2 next year or a 3 next year. I think they would love to do that. Fans won't like it, but I think the ones that are in attendance on Thursday, but I think that's really what they want to do. I mean, this is a front office that relies on data, available data. They don't want to guess. And I think, trading out of a draft where you don't have information, there's a lack thereof, going forward is probably the move they want to make. I just don't know if the end of round 1 is so weak. I don't know who's going to trade up for that spot. Like, who does somebody want? I guess maybe some of the O linemen, but no one's trading up for a quarterback. There's unless somebody really slides that a team wants, it's not in a position that is going to fit the Browns. I'm just not sure who's going to trade up a bunch of assets for a late first round pick. So you would need a trade partner there. But yeah, if they could get a pick up a 2 this year and something next year, I think they would love to do that, and I would love to do that. In terms of Gilmore, I don't know. I mean, he's 30 years old. It's not a move, not the type of move that they would make, trading multiple assets for a 30-year-old corner who's in the last year of his deal. Like, this just doesn't really fit what they want to do. Not saying that report is wrong. I don't know. I don't have any clue about that, but it doesn't really fit their DNA. But look, if they're going to go for it, maybe they think that this is their window with the Baker, 5th-year option. Maybe you go ahead and make a move like that. I don't know. It would be cool to see. I would love to. I mean, that'd be great secondary we would have, but it doesn't really fit their DNA. But again, I don't know. I mean, this is a different year, and maybe this is their chance to go ahead and make a move like that. Would be great.
I'll ask this last question because the guy, Rashad Bateman, I like him a lot. I think I noticed yesterday or day before, something like that, had come across. I noticed that you'd said something about maybe he was a little undervalued by NFL people, a little overvalued by Twitter people, which could definitely be possible. Somebody asked if you would be comfortable with him on maybe a day 2, if they traded back per se, the scenario we just talked about. Maybe they trade back a couple 10 spots and pick up an extra third or an extra end of the second from somebody with a couple seconds. Is he a guy you're comfortable with round 2? Is that where you see sort of peg him in?
Yeah, and that's why I listed him as kind of a second day guy instead of first day. Just, when I step back, and again, this is I'm not a film study guy per se, so I'm not going to talk about his route running and all those, but just stepping back and saying, are there teams really going to jump at a 6 feet, 190? So it doesn't have elite size, kind of very basic kind of, size. I know he plays some outside, but, size wise, he's not elite. His athletic testing was just okay. It was like a relative athletic score of 8, which is fine, but again, well below what they've normally drafted in rounds 1 and 2. I mean, they've drafted literally everyone is like 8.5 or higher. So you're talking about a guy whose athleticism isn't really off the charts. I mean, his vertical and broad are just kind of middle of the class. So and he had a tough year. I know he had the COVID issues this year, but he dropped a ton of balls. I mean, he had a 14% drop rate this year. And so it's just like one of those things where, is that really worthy of a late first round pick, especially when we've seen receivers throughout the last handful of years? You can find really good receivers in rounds 2, 3, 4. Do you really need to spend a pick in the 20s or even the late teens to do something like that? And it doesn't really fit with, just kind of my antenna goes up and I say, it seems like it's one of those, Twitter people love him, but do the NFL guys really like him? I'm not sure. But yeah, if you traded down or if you waited, if you somehow fell to the end of round 2, by all means, I think that would make a lot more sense. I just don't see him as a pick at 26. But again, I could be wrong. They may go for kind of the safer route at receiver because there's so many slot guys, right? All these small guys that don't necessarily fit maybe what they want from the outside. So it's possible. I mean, we didn't talk about Kadarius Toney, but that one really kind of I never really looked at him as an option originally. But if you look at his number, I mean, his height is 5'11", 193, so it's decent size. He's not like Rondell Moore size. He's got some level of, he's close to 6 feet. He ran a 4.38 40. Relative athletic score of 9. He's got a Spark percentile of 90%, so really good. He's the 90th percentile in the vertical, 99th in the broad. He broke a ton of tackles last year. He's kind of a gadget guy at Florida, but big play guy, which they like. Again, they want, with analytics, you want explosive plays, right? And we don't really have, we do have that with OBJ, but, going forward, you don't really have that because, Higgins isn't that guy necessarily. We don't know about Peoples-Jones. So he's actually a guy that stood out to me as if I had a choice between him and Bateman. He's a guy that checks a lot more of those guardrails in those boxes than Bateman does to me for what the Browns are looking for. If it came down to that, but he sounds like he might be sliding out of round 1. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. But those are, like I said, once you get into late round 2, I think you loosen those things up a little bit from an analytics perspective.
Yeah, I think all those guys, like if they trade back, like you mentioned earlier, and they gather some 2s, 4s, something like that, some of those guys like Elijah Moore, Kadarius Toney, those guys become in play. Terrace Marshall could become in play, some of those types. I'll leave you with this question. We'll head out. I put your guys up here, your round 3 through 7 types. A guy asked your potential day 3 steal. Is there anybody you want to just kind of shout out as someone you've noticed?
There's 2 guys I like. Nico Collins, I think from a receiver standpoint, if you wait till rounds 3 and 4, again, kind of like the Peoples-Jones, just really good athleticism, maybe underproduced because of the quarterback there and the offensive system. And then, a guy I know you mentioned, again, I haven't done any film study, but just purely box checking, Zach Mcpherson out of Texas Tech, the corner. Decent size. He's not a big guy, but he's not small. His athletic testing was excellent. He had a PFF cover grade of 85.7. He kind of fits all of that to me. He is 23, I believe, so he's a little bit older. But I think once you get in rounds 3 to 7, I think they loosen that up. It's not, the age isn't really as big of an issue as you get later in the process. And so I think that's a guy just from a high level. He checks a lot of those boxes. He's a position of need. And could be a guy that maybe is like a round 4 or 5 guy, which I think would be excellent. I know Dane Brugler likes him as well. He mentioned him as a underrated guy. So again, without you putting the film study on, just from a metric standpoint and a need, it seems like he fits the bill.
Well, those are 2 great names. TA, listen, man, this was great. Guys, if you have questions for him, make sure you're following him on Twitter at Cleve, which is CLEVTA. He's going to give you feedback on what if he's throwing something out and you ask a question about it, he'll give you some feedback on why he thinks that way. It's data-backed stuff. It's a balanced perspective of if you don't dig into the numbers, follow people who do dig into the numbers to get a perspective that is outside your own. I think that's healthy when you look at this stuff. He's one of the best guys doing numbers on the Browns corner of this whole Twitter street. So make sure you're following him and make sure you're checking him out on Sharp Football and the Sharp Angles podcast, because both are great for data metric stuff. So TA, thanks again, man. Can't thank you enough for coming on.
Thanks, Jake. I appreciate it.
Guys, that's a wrap for today. Like I said, huge shout out to TA for taking time for us. We have one more great guest lined up tomorrow. We'll have Doug Lesmarie on, and we will talk with him from Cleveland.com. Good friend of mine. Always some great conversation. You guys have been awesome. We will do one more mock. We'll do a mock Wednesday. My man Stephen Thomas will be joining me again, and we will do another one of these mocks, and I can't wait. It's going to be fun. The stuff is finally here. You guys have been great following along. Almost 100 of us in here tonight. It's going to be more interesting as we approach Thursday. We get some clarity on some picks. Pumped about it. Pumped for you guys joining us for the live show that I have up here. Reminder, Thursday, Friday, 7:30. Join us. We'll have everybody on. We can have chat room conversations popping. We'll respond to questions. It'll be a hell of a lot of fun. So join it. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get pinged whenever we go live for these shows. And also check out tomorrow's OBR Weekly. Barry and Fred come on and do a great job with Lane Atkins. We'll be on that one as well with them. And then make sure you subscribe to the OBR Film Breakdown podcast, where I have all of these posted in podcast form the next day. So until tomorrow, when we're back with Doug, go Browns.